Please help me welcome to the stage the masculine and feminine John Lithgow. Now, I have to say, of all the things you've done, maybe my favorite thing ever is your Baudelaire from Saturday Night Live.
Acting again.
Thank you. Because obviously you're growing up in an acting family with an actor father and teacher actor father, and spending so much time in theater clearly shaped that character in some way. You say you talk in the book about giving something to the audience. Well, Baudelaire gave to the audience, but most importantly to himself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, do you all know what we're talking about? It was the great series of sketches with John Lovitz on Saturday Night Live, where he was Master Thespian and I was Baudelaire. I only did it 3 times. I hosted the show 3 times, but everybody's always asking me to say, acting! You know, so I obliged them.
Well, thank you for doing that. And I figured, too, that's when Bonnie and Terry Turner were working on the show,
yes,
and they created Third Rock from the Sun.
Yeah. Exactly. Of the 3 times I hosted SNL, Bonnie and Terry were on the writing staff the second 2, and we became great friends. They didn't actually write much material for me, but we all worked together, and they were there to watch me go through all that crazy review acting. And it all came about, and Third Rock came up about 4 years later, out of the blue. When they were asked to do Third Rock, they just came up with this character of Dick Solomon, and they thought I was the person. They saw Dick Solomon as a combination of Errol Flynn and Bugs Bunny. Somebody who could absolutely turn on a dime and had a great sense of the ridiculous, and that was me.
But also, one of the things you said in the introduction, you play these guys who really think they have this enormous sense of self-knowledge, and many of them don't.
Uh-huh.
Where does that come from?
That was so great, what you said, Elvis. I never thought of myself that way.
I'm not saying you, I'm saying these guys.
Well, no, but me too. I guess the thing I always grab onto is a kind of duality, a sort of misperception of yourself. Basically, acting in anything is a matter of different realities. It's always great when the audience knows things that the actors don't, or one character knows something that the other character doesn't. That was what was so captivating about Dexter, that little chess game between the 2 of them. There was a whole complicated list of things that the 2 of us did not know and did know about each other, and did not know that the other one knew. Yeah. And then the audience knew things that neither of them knew. There's basically all that, I may be making an extremely wrong generalization, but all drama and all comedy comes out of that kind of duality and a series of misperceptions. Othello is wrong about Desdemona. Iago tells us something that they don't know. You know, a whole series of tensions. And I basically, when I look at a character, that's what I think is so fun about the characters. I look for those points where the character is either deluding himself, deluding somebody else, or the audience knows that he's deluded.
But you can also play that too for an enormous sense of tragedy. I mean, I just think of your performance in Sweet Smell of Success, where JJ thinks he really knows himself, and he thinks he's setting this whole world into motion. He doesn't know anything at all. No. I mean, it's incredible to see you use that and play it for both these things of enormous comedy and enormous tragedy.
Well, the best example of all of that is M. Butterfly,
yes,
which I consider like the most exciting piece of theater I was ever involved in. What could be a more extravagant self-deception than that?
You should tell them what it's about in case they don't know.
M. Butterfly is about a French diplomat working in China who falls in love with a man and carries on a 20-year-long affair with him without knowing that, number one, this man is a spy, and number two, this man is a woman. And I mean, there is not a more extreme dramatization of self-deception than that. And yet it had such power because, I mean, for one, this was David Henry Hwang's first great play and the first Broadway Tony-winning play written by an Asian American.
And also a terrific lead performance, too.
Great, two tremendous roles. B.D. Wong played Sung Li Ling, the transvestite actor. And it was just packed with ideas that were so astonishingly new to the audience because they were the Asian American male's point of view, something that we Caucasians, never much thought about.
And also this dichotomy between the Western sort of idea that you know everything and the Eastern ideal of secrets being kept constantly.
Yeah.
Those tensions playing against each other.
Constant, a variation on the theme of misperception and self-delusion. And the great thing about that play, what I always think is, the highest aspiration of any play is a sort of intersection between ideas and emotions. Something that completely engrosses you emotionally, grabs you emotionally, and yet blows your mind with its ideas.
But that's almost a conceit out of screwball comedy, a character who's constantly explaining himself and has no idea he's completely wrong about it. I mean, that goes back to Preston Sturges. Yeah. But in Butterfly, it's completely, enormously tragic.
Yeah. Well, that's it. That's at the very heart of comedy and drama, as you say. But and you're right. There's again, the most extreme version of self-delusion in comedy is Dick Solomon. I mean, completely clueless, and yet insisting that he knew everything.
Yes. But we can even say that about your character in Dexter as well. I mean, this guy who thinks he's got his worlds are incredibly compartmentalized, but they are not because Dexter knows who and what he is.
Yeah.
I mean, what attracts you to these kinds of people, though? I mean, there's got to be something in terms of that sort of turn on a dime thing, that psychology where they often tend to shift from one thing to another very quickly.
Well, I am drawn to these characters, but I rarely pick them. They pick me. The characters don't pick me, but the producers and the directors do. They find I'm on the short list for all the freaks. They say Lithgow can handle this.
Well, I would never have said that out loud, but since you bring it up. I mean,
you saw it out there on the screen.
But I even thought about, not even in terms of a character, but I remember there's a beautiful piece. The first thing you ever wrote, and he's got a great book, memoir, drama, which you have to read. But the first thing I ever read that you wrote, a beautiful diary as you were making Terms of Endearment. You talk about going back and forth from making that movie and Footloose at the same time. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think of the Reverend in Footloose as almost being the first apotheosis of that character who thinks he knows everything. And it's built this conceit. He's concentrated on this world that's right in front of his eyes and doesn't see anything else around him. It feels like that's almost the first version of that guy.
Mm-hmm. That was a fascinating experience, Footloose. I mean, I knew this was a kind of teeny bopper dance and rock and roll movie, but I took it very seriously, mainly because of Herb Ross and Dean Pitchford, who wrote it, and Kevin, a terrific actor playing Wren. I approached it, I'm not a fervent church-going Christian, and here I was playing a fanatical evangelical preacher, and I had to get inside that. In the yellow pages in Provo, Utah, I looked up the Assembly of God, called up, and went there for spiritual counseling. And I sat down with the preacher there, and he spent 45 minutes with me. I felt like an incredible snake in the grass, of course. But he was truly moving. I had the sense that he completely believed. He was not a fraud. He was not a charlatan. He wasn't a showman. He talked to me about his deep relationship with Jesus Christ.
He was a charismatic in the old sense of the word.
Yeah, and it was invaluable to go. In order to play that part, I had to meet with somebody who truly believed, because I needed to play it with a great sense of authenticity. And I'll tell you the incredible story about this. Years and years later, I was working on an episode of Third Rock from the Sun, in which the family of aliens were all stuck in a circus. They were all involved in a circus. There was a young actor, big, tall, brawny, handsome guy who was playing the strong man in the circus. And after a couple of days of work, he took me aside and he said, I've been waiting for the right moment to talk to you about this. I come from a little town in Louisiana, and my daddy is the Baptist minister in that town. And he wouldn't let kids listen to rock and roll or dance. And I went to see Footloose one night. I didn't know anything about it. And you were my daddy in that movie. And I took my daddy to that movie the next night without telling him anything about it. And I just have to tell you, by this time, tears were rolling down his cheeks. He said, because of your performance, I was the first one of 6 kids who was allowed to go to his senior prom. And it was like, my God. It's like the best example I ever had, that you never know what you're throwing out there, but all you can do is really believe in what you're doing.
Well, it's funny you say that, because in that piece you say something that is kind of the theme of your life. Love the one you're with. And that kind of commitment to the work is what you do. I mean, you find a way to fall in love with these characters, don't you?
Well, another example of that was the Trinity Killer. I mean, to play a villain as if it's yourself. I mean, to me, the most fascinating thing about the Trinity Killer was the terribly melancholy undertow to that character. He was compelled to do something so horrible, and he hated himself for doing it. And he wanted somebody to stop him. He even pushed the envelope. He almost tried to get apprehended. Because, I mean, talk about duality, and yet he was absolutely compelled to do it. And not only that, he had this other very kind of relaxed, insouciant cover. He was a good man. He was a church deacon and a good dad and a good husband.
And in Dexter, he's looking for a real son, though. I mean, that becomes the real tragedy, the only relationship he has.
That's right. And that relationship becomes a genuine, caring relationship. All those things going on. And you can only do that by having sympathy for the devil, basically. It's playing the part as if it's you.
But you also talk about something in the book that I found fascinating, too. You begin with talking about your relationship with your little sister and how you became kind of an entertainer, in fact, by just your love for her, your love for entertaining her. And then we flash forward about 15 years, I guess, when you are doing a production of Mice and Men. And you can't keep these, for high school kids, and you can't keep their attention, partially because you don't believe in the character you're playing. And you don't explicitly say it, but part of your getting through those kids is figuring out a way to believe in the character, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, it was both that and just the sort of craft of it. Sure. Figuring out how to kill a laugh before it starts.
Tell them the sort of
strangle a laugh in its crib.
Because
I was a young actor. It was my very first equity job, and I was cast as Lenny in Of Mice and Men.
Laughing now already.
Not a likely role for me, but I was the tallest person in the company. This was at the McCarter Theater, and I worked very hard, and the director was very good. I wore padding and big heavy shoes and put weights around and I gradually evolved into what I thought was a great Lenny. And in fact, we performed it for the adults at the McCarter subscribers, and we got great reviews. But then it came time to do a children's matinee. We had a dozen children's matinees of Mice and Men, And I got out there to unveil my Lenny thinking, oh, they're going to love this. And they completely laughed me off the stage. All those things that we thought were so moving and that had been so moving for grown-ups, they thought were hysterically funny. And I was like shaking with rage and thinking, my God, I've got to do this 10, 11 more times? I'll kill them, I'll kill them. But I had to do it. So performance by performance, almost kind of mechanically, mathematically, I took all those moments where I lost control of them, and I learned how to kill the laugh, or to slip past, or to take a particularly strange line and just mumble it, or just bury it, and whereas the first performance, when they'd all screamed with laughter, at the end when George had the pistol behind Lenny's head and was ready to mercy kill him, there was a kid out in the audience that said, "Shoot him, George!" And the whole crowd roared with laughter. Well, by the end, absolutely, you've never heard such silence. And George, or except for kids sobbing, you heard them sobbing. And George was holding the pistol to my head, and someone would yell, "Don't do it, George!" It was completely different. And it was the best, as I describe in the book, it was the best education I've ever had. I learned so much from those 14 and 15-year-old kids that adults don't tell you. If adults are not comfortable with something, or bored by something, or turned off by something, the only way they express their displeasure is by applauding a little bit more lamely. But kids, they'll laugh you off the stage. It's fabulous.
Then this was kind of a lifelong thing for you, but I think it still goes back to what you said in that Terms of Endearment diary. Love the one you're with, finding a way to fall in love with this piece, and communicating that belief, because what you talk about is the magical power the kids have of completely suspending disbelief. Mm-hmm. They are where they are, yeah. And you can tell them where they are. And you've got to fall in love with that character, yeah. So you can transport them, don't you?
Yeah. Well, and in that case, I mean, in the book, I'm talking about entertaining very little children. That's a different constituency altogether. I still entertain tiny kids. This target audience of 3 to 8-year-old audiences doing kids shows and kids concerts. And that is fantastic. I mean, basically what I do is to try to create a suspension of disbelief in an audience. With adults, you never completely succeed. They always know they're sitting in a theater and that this is pretend, that actors are impressing them with their ability to imitate reality. But they know it's an imitation. Kids honestly don't know. They walk into a theater, they don't even know what a theater is. You know, and I walk out on stage, they believe everything I do. They have absolutely no irony. They haven't learned it yet. I walk out, I come out and sing my first song with a derby hat or something, or a top hat. And I finish the song, and I start talking to the kids, welcoming them, and the conductor tugs on my sleeve and points to my hat. And I say, "What?" I reach up and I say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I do this all the time. I put the hat on, I sing the song, I forget to take my hat off. It's my worst habit. If it happens again, be sure to tell me." Well, in the course of the concert, I wear about 6 or 7 hats. They get more and more ridiculous. Kangaroo ears and little propellers and a pith helmet. Every time I forget to take off my hat. And the kids, it like grows. You can just take off your hat, take off your hat! Like it's the most horrific mistake. They have no idea that I'm doing a number on them, you know? I mean, it's pure, and then, or I play this game of guess the animals with a huge easel and a felt pen. I say, "This is the game of guess the animal. I'm going to draw the animal. You have to guess what it is before I finish the picture." And I'll start drawing and drawing And they'll start yelling things, and it's clearly a hippo, and they'll start saying, "It's a hippo! It's a hippo!" And I turn to them and I say, "It's a what? It's a what? Funny, I thought you would get this one. It's a hippo!" And I say, "You're right, it's a hippo." Screaming. You've never heard such a noise from an audience. And then I sing them the hippopotamus song. And they are absolutely in the palm of my hands. They listen to every syllable, and they have no idea that I was tricking them. Basically, they're so stupid.
They can hear you. But even in that case, though, and I was struck by this in the book, this is when I came to this realization, when you're doing that, you're playing with the idea of self-awareness. I mean, and that's a fascinating thing. It's almost a Brechtian approach and I wonder if it came somehow from your dad, the conversation you had about acting with your father, because it's unique for you.
But you're so right. It is about commitment. It's about completely committing to something. And I think that's why people come to me to play these crazy roles, because I play them with a kind of ferocious commitment. And to me, it's like red meat to a tiger. Just try me, Trinity killer? Sure. Try me. I can make this work, and you work at it to find a way to make it real.
But you even talk about in that piece, when you're talking about Footloose, how it can't just be a black and white bubblegum story.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't just do that, or else it becomes a straw villain. I mean, he's somebody who's easy to hate.
Yeah.
And you understood that at that point. You don't articulate, but you're basically saying that. And the same thing about Sam, because you're going back and forth between terms of endearment and Footloose. So just getting that in my head, those two different guys. So this one guy who's completely open to everything, and this one guy who's completely closed to everything.
Yeah.
And you're moving back and forth between the two.
Yep, literally a day apart. Very different characters. Well, you heard a gentleman tonight say, what's great is you can play a good guy, but you can also play a great bad guy. What fascinates me is good guys doing bad things, and bad guys surprising you with redemptive moments of goodness. I mean, that's where it gets so complicated, because life isn't that simple. What's most compelling is when the line is blurred between good and bad. Between villainy and virtue.
Well, this first clip we saw from Obsession is that same kind of person. If you've seen Obsession, I mean, he looks like a guy with his heart on his sleeve, who basically throws his arm around his partner, who's trying to push him out of this obsession with his past life. And again, there's a commitment from that character to this role he's playing.
Yeah.
Who turns out to be the worst person in the world.
Yeah, it's something that Brian does in most of his movies. His villains are always these apparently virtuous people.
And also these guys who are incredibly theatrical. I mean, between that character and the character you play in Blowout, who is just basically almost like a series of turns.
Yeah.
And just has this sort of operatic relationship. I see the connection between that character almost and the Trinity Killer in Dexter. Just as he's doing these things, he's horrified by these murders, but he has to do them. I mean,
we talked about De Palma all the time when we did Trinity.
It's funny, you watch Dexter, you'd think it's a show influenced by De Palma.
Very much so. They were very aware of De Palma. And so was Roman Tirone, the cinematographer. If you look at the way, to the extent that they could.
Sure.
They didn't have Brian's time to do, to rehearse an entire day to shoot one shot, which he did.
What was that? I mean, that experience of going from doing a low-budget movie with him, Obsession, to doing Blowout, where it's operatic.
And Raising Cain.
Oh my, which is really opera. It's all opera.
Raising Cain is pure opera. And good God, he had me playing 5 characters by the end. I'm delighted that I hadn't seen Raising Cain in years. I was delighted by the scene between the father and the son.
Oh my God.
You did know those were both me.
Well, I'm sorry, what are you saying? I have to rethink this whole line of questioning now.
But if you ever see Raising Cain for the first or again, there is an amazing De Palma signature shot Francis Sternhagen. It's this long, boring exposition. You know what I'm talking about, where she tells all about the phenomenon of split personality and how these people can be completely unaware of what the other person is doing, even though it's all the same person. It's all in his mind. This is a speech that long in the script. Well, Brian, as I say, rehearsed an entire day. And then the second day, he shot the single shot. The camera follows Frances Sternhagen down. It was a sort of atrium with all these hallways. And they followed her downstairs, up here, and down hallways, down the basement, in a door, down another hall, into a laboratory, and finally on my face, waiting down there, in prison, waiting to be interviewed by her. And it's a completely breathtaking shot. Totally unnecessary. but it was just Brian having a fabulous time.
But there are so many shots like that in Blowout. Talk to me about that character. I mean, that may be my favorite of anything you've done. I really do love that.
I loved it. He was a sort of renegade Secret Service agent who he'd just gotten completely out of control, and his whole thing, he had to eliminate this young floozy played by Nancy Allen because she knew too much. She had witnessed, or John Travolta had confided in her an assassination attempt. She had to be got rid of.
Of which he had a recording, by the way. He had physical evidence of the assassination.
Physical evidence. So he had to get rid of this young woman. In order to do this without being apprehended, he posed as a serial killer who killed young prostitutes who looked just like her. She would be one of them so that the motive for killing her would not be apprehended. I mean, a truly deranged premise and a deranged character. But my approach to him was, as usual with a villain, a man who's completely convinced that he's right, but that is so bloodless, has absolutely no emotion. He's pretending to be someone with a murderous compulsion. He doesn't even have that. This is all just mechanics. And he does it with an ice pick. He stabs the shape of a Liberty Bell on the abdomen of these women. And so he's known as the Liberty Bell killer. All so that people won't know what his real motivation is for killing this innocent woman. Absolutely horrific. I mean, this is Brian at his most diabolical. But what's truly diabolical is that this man has absolutely no affect. In fact, my favorite scene in Blowout was on the telephone. I posed as a
cell phone repairman,
electrical contractor with a hard hat. And I called 2 or 3 different people, pretending to be the serial killer and then pretending to be a couple of it. And I do it all with my voice, but with my face completely impassive. And Brian had shot it all in one with the camera going round and round me so that as I went from one character to another, it was all one continuous shot. Oh my God, I can't help it. You know, so the voice was this tortured soul and the face was like a mask. Unfortunately, they cut the scene into 3 pieces and distributed it through the so it broke my heart, but it had to happen.
Oh God! But it's such a again, seeing that character, I can really see that influence, and it would be a natural for them to call you to do Trinity Killer on Dexter because of that.
Of course, you know, it was like 30 years before. It was the nice thing is people had sort of forgotten that I'd done those villain characters because of Third Rock. Along came Third Rock, and I became very, very well known.
But also, probably, use this word, beloved. What was that like?
Yeah.
I mean, people weren't recoiling and saying, "Laugh while you can, monkey boy," when they came up to you.
Yeah, it was a fantastic experience. I loved doing Third Rock. I mean, it was so flat out fun. I'd never thought to do a sitcom before, or any episodic.
And you turned down. You must have turned down a lot of television up until that point.
I didn't even consider it in a way, Bonnie and Terry, whom we've mentioned before, they tricked me into it.
Oh, yeah?
I got a call from my agent saying that your good friends Bonnie and Terry wanted to have breakfast. And I said, oh, they're in town. Great, I'd love to have breakfast with Bonnie and Terry. So I arrived at the Four Seasons Hotel, and there was Bonnie and Terry and Tom Werner and Marcy Carsey and Karen Mando, the whole crowd from Carsey Werner Television. And I
By the way, you should tell your relationship with Tom Werner.
Well, that was the beginning of it. Because I looked at them and I said, oh my God, I've been ambushed. They're giving me a sitcom pitch. I sat down, had breakfast, and sure enough, they said, well, we have this show in mind. Terry, tell John about the show. He said, well, it's about this family of aliens. And I thought, oh my God, how do I say no to this and get out of here as politely as possible and as quickly as possible? But 5 minutes into his pitch, I was completely sold.
What was it about the pitch that appealed to you?
Just what we've been talking about. The fact that Dick Solomon was desperate to figure out who he was and was basically trying out all sorts of different identities. He was trying to figure out what it was to be human. I mean, you all had seen Third Rock. That was the comedy of his character, trying to get it right, and constantly getting it wrong, and having had this wonderful combination of unbelievable intelligence and skill, but totally clueless about human emotion and behavior, so that he was capable of doing all these extraordinary things. Squash? Sure, I'll play squash. Whack, 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 and he's brilliant at squash. Everything he can sing Cole Porter close harmony with the rest of the aliens, like at the drop, without ever, the first time he ever looks at a piano, he figures it out. So he has this combination of brilliance and stupidity. It was in collision with each other, but constantly trying to figure out who he was. And by extension, it's about human beings. We're all trying to figure out who we are our whole lives.
But I just wonder, because of this thing that's kind of run through your performances, how you do away with that awareness of communicating that to the audience. I mean, is this something you learn first on stage and then you bring into the film work, or
you mean
not giving too much away?
Yeah.
Because it's a tough thing to do, but playing that kind of thing, because you can, for example, the comedy becomes too broad and obvious, or in the case of Dexter, you're giving the whole thing away and people laugh instead of being understanding of this character.
But you're talking as if I always succeed at this.
Yes, I am. I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt.
The good news is you never see my lousy performances, and I'm not going to tell you what they are.
We'll just keep it in this room. I swear we won't tell anybody.
Well, it's all a matter of just finding the authenticity of a moment. I mean, you look at a scene, and a scene has several beats. Any dialogue between two or more characters, it goes in different directions, but every direction it goes in has to be motivated by the emotional shifts in the scene. It's just a matter of figuring it all out and making it all authentic and real, to the point where nobody can see what the mechanics are. All they see is the reality of the scene. Am I talking total garbage?
No.
I'm feeling very pretentious, but
No.
But this is very much how I work. It's just to be methodical about making sure everything is motivated. And I would drive the Third Rock writers crazy, because as insane as Third Rock from the Sun was, I always insisted that things be completely motivated and real.
Because the reason I'm asking you all these things is, in reading the book, it made me think about your father sort of coming to terms with his own self-awareness, and also that happening because of your success at a point where he realized what he was not going to have. Mm-hmm. I mean, it almost feels like the reason you wrote that book is because of sort of those sort of ships passing in the night and that kind of self-awareness of him not having that sort of success and the amount of emotion he invested in your success. I mean, his upset when you got bad reviews. I mean, his being distraught about that.
Yeah, thank you for reading it with such care, Elvis. That really means a lot to me. I mean that. It is the year 1973 in my life. It was the year my career absolutely took off. That's when I had a Broadway debut, and 3 weeks later I won a Tony Award, and I was off. It was the year my father lost the last good job he had. It was from that moment on, his career, he really struggled from then on. He was 57 years old. He was 8 years younger than I am now. And he never really had a good professional job again. And I was almost guilty at feeling suddenly embraced by the business at the very moment when my father was so spurned, and he was also let go from this job. It was the McCarter job in a very ignominious way. It was so painful. But God bless that man. He was so happy for me. And if certainly no envy at all, and he sort of didn't betray his own terrible disappointment in the least. It was like he allowed me to feel the joy of my success at that moment, and really for the rest of my life. He was always so proud of everything I did. Even moments when I felt my father must think this is a total sellout, you know. Oh no, he thought it was wonderful.
What was one of the things you did that you thought he would think was a sellout novel?
Well, doing a sitcom. And he thought Third Rock was marvelous. I mean, this is a man who did Shakespeare and Shaw and Chekhov. He did classical repertory, mainly in professional theaters, but in university settings his whole life. He did 4 or 5 different summer Shakespeare festivals in Ohio when I was growing up. This was, to him, this was the highest aspiration. And look, I'd barely done Shakespeare in my career, even though I had done 20 Shakespeare plays for him by the time I was 20 years old. I almost turned my back on it in order to do something different from what he had done. And yet he made me feel so proud. Yeah, I mean, he was so delighted by my success. I felt like it was a gift to me.
It's that moment where you're kind of saying, in effect, that you really felt him become your father in the way you had not before.
I beg pardon?
He become your father in that moment, in the way that he had not before.
Yeah.
Because there was that sort of professional consideration and pouring himself into the work, these things you allude to. But that moment where you're succeeding and there's no bitterness, that father-son relationship really sort of connects.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like an extremely lucky actor in that I grew up so close to the process. I grew up in a theater family, and I saw so much of the struggle. I've had a lot of success, but I certainly know that it can end at any time. I know what it's like to struggle and feel not wanted in this profession, and I know what a harsh profession it can be. And I've always felt that I was kind of forewarned and forearmed as a result because of my dad.
Well,